Hello, everybody, and welcome back to That's a Data Problem. I'm Daniel Newman, your host, Principal Analyst at Futurum Research. And I'm really excited to be joined today by James Hodge, GVP and Chief Strategy Advisor at Splunk. James, how are you today?
I'm great, Daniel. I'm really excited about this talk.
Today's conversation is going to be called or entitled Accelerating Cloud-Driven Transformation. And so we're going to talk about really what's going on in this space, all things, how cloud's data, observability, and so much more. James, are you ready to get started with me?
I sure am. I've been looking forward to this all day, Daniel.
Yeah, see, if you can't tell, James is across the pond from me, but it's early morning here. But it's one of those things, like I always try to not date and time a pod or a video, but the world out there, they're always a little bit interested in where are you? What are you doing when these things get recorded? So, I've been up since 5 a.m. doing recordings today. Kind of love the early morning, drinking coffee out of my bat mug that we got to talk about off air. But there's so much to cover here. Real quick though, before I get in and hit you up on some of these questions, James, start off and talk a little bit about what it means to be the chief strategy advisor globally for Splunk.
So it's a new role that we've created this year. And what we've really realized is our customers get a huge amount of value out of Splunk and they're looking to do more with it. How can they actually move away from just thinking about Splunk in technology terms, but accelerating their business? And so we've created a new group that can help advise our customers, consult with them to really help align to co-creating joint outcomes. And that's really exciting. I've spent my entire career kind of on the tech side of things, but actually the business technology, and especially with this conversation cloud, is just so relevant today.
Absolutely. I always talk about the intersection of people and technology, and that's really where digital transformation lies. So it's a big job, and it has been actually a big lift for Splunk over the last year, because not only are you responsible to overhaul and help overhaul the customers, but you as a company have been busy overhauling your own business model, changing from prem to cloud, from different ways of billing and charging clients to a much more well understood model of subscription. And it's been interesting to watch. So it's probably a twofold. And then, of course, we've dealt with the pandemic. And, if people have listened, there's a whole series of these conversations. And, I got to talk to, your CEO, Doug Merritt. I'm talking to you now. I've talked to advisors across America, and it's great to get everyone's perspective. So I'm going to dive in here. I want to talk about this whole cloud migration, this acceleration. I think most of us and most of you that are tuned in know we've realized you can't just lift and shift, people and processes as you move to the cloud. What's your take on kind of this? What's your take on how organizations, need to adapt to new environments?
I think the biggest part about it is a cultural change. I think you're talking about you're the other side of the pond. I think culturally, just look at what we're doing now. Go from pre-pandemic, we probably would have tried to fly together and be able to meet, sit across the table, which would have been amazing. But I'm at the end of my garden in London. You're sat at home in kind of your home office, and we're able to go and do that. But
beautiful Chicago.
Beautiful Chicago. The right time of year, I think, at the moment. It's not too cold. But to do that, that's a cultural change that we had to get through to be able to do it. Technology is there to enable us, but it's the cultural change is the most important. And that's exactly the same for the shift to cloud. It is 100% understanding why. Why are you making that shift to cloud? It's very easy to say we're a cloud first company, we're a cloud now company. I think you just need to look at earnings calls across the FTSE 500. They'll all be talking about their shift to cloud, but it's really understanding why. And I think when you can get into really being true to yourself and why you're doing that, that's, I think, the first step. And unless you completely disagree with me, Daniel.
No, I think it's a great assessment. I mean, first of all, there were forces of nature that put us here. And I would say some companies were already in their transformation, moving to more virtual, more remote, more cloud, more transformation. But we've all heard the various metaphors and anecdotes about years converting to weeks or months of transformation that were forced by the global pandemic. And to be totally frank, I mean, there's very little good that comes from a black swan event like a global pandemic. You have so many things that we can all look back at and wish we did better. But if there's one positive, at least in the enterprise space, it was that companies that had been kind of sitting on the sidelines, that had been waiting out the investments, that have been kind of saying, we think this too, this cloud, this data thing, this will pass. It won't pass. It didn't pass. And those companies were really forced to move very quickly. And it wasn't as James, what I love about what you said is it wasn't so much about moving quickly to buy technology. Most of these companies had technology. It was moving quickly to actually adopt it and adapt to it and implement it and use it at scale and say, we've got all these investments. We can't just kind of use it. And video conferencing, you mentioned, is such a good example because like every company had some platform for virtual meetings. That wasn't new. But what was the use rate? I mean, we were flying all over the globe to have coffee. And by the way, I miss that now, but you probably realized by the end of the pandemic, you could have had a lot of those meetings like this and been very productive throughout your days.
I completely agree. And I think it's just changed our approach. When I was thinking about why you're doing something, I think when we think about the shift to cloud, is what am I redoing? Is it, I think McKinsey were describing this recently, there's $1 trillion of opportunity in cloud. And they broke it down as two buckets, rejuvenate, which they said was around $430 billion, or innovate, which was a $770 billion opportunity. And it's the innovate side that I think is the most exciting around cloud. I'm not having to wait for equipment, the classic things we've all heard before, to be racked and stacked and get on with something. And it also allows me to, maybe I change the way I describe it. The ability of cloud has meant I've been able to unlock my imagination. As I think about my customer and work backwards from that, I can actually unlock my imagination, and the technology is going to allow me to go and achieve that. And is going to allow me to do that at speed with agility, to be able to innovate faster, to go and get the right experience for my end customers, rather than before. That was a big uplift, and it was difficult. When I failed hard, especially in a data center world. Whereas cloud, I can fail fast and adapt and pivot. I think it's that innovation side that has given us the biggest opening on why are we going to do this lift and shift to cloud.
Right, but you got to do it in a way that works. And like you said, you can't just lift and shift processes. That's probably one of the most important and things that you cannot you have to remind people you don't take a process and digitalize it or move it from prem to cloud and just try to have it replicate identically. These are opportunities to completely reevaluate your entire way of doing business. And, so often I think a lot of us probably learned it. And I don't know if you have these experiences, but I've seen so many ERP or CRM implementations where a company basically says, how did we do it before this digital or this cloud capability? And then they basically want to lift it over to the cloud and do it the exact same way, just support it using the support of, the cloud scale. And so when you add things like microservices and Kubernetes and the flexibility of hybrid and multi, you add a whole new, like you said, use your imagination, innovation. What could it be? How could this process be improved or refined? What data could we incorporate that we haven't been able to incorporate? So those are some kind of things to think about. I want to keep moving along though. And this basically maybe actually gives you a chance to respond to what I just said, the cohesive management strategy of moving to cloud. We're seeing the lift to public, and then we're seeing basically more of an emphasis on lift to hybrid now, and now even multi. So all of this kind of path goes from prem to public to hybrid to multi. What are some of the big issues that you're seeing in terms of actually getting these deployed successfully?
I think the biggest is the realization that applications almost are your business now. I think we've seen almost across industry, everyone moving to a digitized way of working. Just look at the US Census Bureau, the Splunk Cloud customer. They've just run the first digital census. that is a huge shift and cultural shift they've had. So you've got a lot of historic systems. You've got a lot of complexity and uncertainty. Even if you're a cloud-first, digitally native business, technology moves so fast that sometime in the future, you're going to meet some new tech and new ways of working that is complex. So you've almost got to embrace that you're going to enter complexity. And so the biggest challenge then becomes, if the apps are your business, is making sure you have complete overview of what is happening. And this is where really that term observability comes in. You want to be able to observe your entire digital estate so you can make the right decision, or the best decision with the right context and data at that moment in time, and not having to delay, because time is and delay is the enemy of innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the, in background when we were talking about some of the pitfalls, you mentioned that there are essentially six. You've got runway costs, you've got trading innovation for stability, you've got creating a cloud strategy without associated security strategy, whole nother big topic. You got new tools without a cohesive approach, spreading your organization too thin, and leaving value in your data. The six pitfalls, kind of his background that you shared, and I like that. I like that whole thinking. So moving forward, what are the capabilities and strategies needed then to assure that you're getting the desired business outcomes from the investments being made in cloud?
So I'm going to start with the people one first. I think we were talking earlier, maybe off camera, about the intersection of people and technology. I think when we talk about innovation, we want to be and serve our customers in the best way possible. That relies on frontline staff. A chief executive can stand up and set company direction, but the people that actually enact that transformation are the individuals on the front line. And I come from an assertion that there are two reasons you don't make a decision. One is you don't have the authority to make it. And the second is you don't have the right data and context to make that decision, so you escalate it. And that, when we're talking about making cloud environments successful, is the most important. When you recognize that, how do you push down authority further down the organization? You give people more data and context. And that's where the technical side of observability, being able to bring logs, traces, and metrics, essentially all of your digital estate, into one place to give frontline staff the right data and context to make those decisions is so important. Because apps, your business, take something like Slack. They've a hugely growing organization at the moment, and they've with their I think if I kind of remember rightly, it's something like 12 million active daily users. It's like just shy of 1 million organizations using Slack. If I'm the person in charge of making sure Slack is secure, not necessarily the CISO, the person on shift that day, I'm going to want to have as much data and context as possible, so I can then go and make that decision on what do I do when I see an event. And that's why when we're talking about your 6 principles, Slack actually take a zero trust approach when they think about cloud estates, but that only works with access to the right information.
Yeah, having all the data at your disposal, and then of course layering in the right technology to enable you. Of course, you could be sitting there, you could have a whole team and whole army of people sitting there. There's still too much volume of data right now. And that's where systems come into place. That's where IT ops and SecOps and observability become the key. Is, how do you parse through it all the data states, the system data, of course, external data. How does a threat get observed early? What type of automation can be implemented to eradicate a threat early, or to notify the right person that's most capable and competent to deal with that? So those are all big things. I'm hearing too, and by the way, I'm glad you mentioned security, because I often feel like as we talk about transformation or cloud acceleration, especially this topic for this show, that security sometimes gets put on the back burner. It historically has. Now, over the last year, with some big events in security, I think a little more attention has been brought to it, but still, I always look back and I remember, for years, there's been boardroom level discussions, James, where companies are basically weighing in the cost of appropriately de-risking versus what the assumed cost of a breach might be, and making decisions on technology investments based upon the fact that if it was less expensive to potentially let the intrusion or some type of breach happen than it was to properly secure it, people were not taking the appropriate precautions. I think we've learned, because there's a lot of intangible costs to a business that maybe can't be determined. Like, there may be a certain amount of cost that you can attribute to denial of service or slow fulfillment or responsiveness that could happen. But what about the fact that people just don't want to work with companies that they feel that their data is not safe? And so those are kind of the evolutions. But I'm hearing about, this convergence. It's security, it's IT, and DevOps. And this is really where you guys, as Splunk, live a lot of your time. And these are being driven even faster by, this cloud transformation. Talk about what you're seeing in terms of these converging forces.
Well, I think you are 100% right on zoning in on that point of trust. And I think there are the two types of companies. The ones that will survive are the ones that will put trust of data and trust by the customers as one of their top priorities. And then the rest. And I think we'll see that play out over the coming years as digital becomes more and more popular. To do that, you've got to then realize that IT operations, developer operations, security operations are all just functions of business operations. They are all trying to get to the same goal. Think of something like a patch level. I had a computer I hadn't used since pre-pandemic. I turned it on the other day as a Splunk computer, and up pops a myriad of alerts telling me that I had to update things, I had to apply patches. What's a patch level? Is that an IT problem? Is that a security problem? Or is that a manifestation of a business problem? And so the way we then think about that at Splunk, by thinking data first and trust first, is in providing a data platform that I can then put an IT operations lens on, an observability lens, a security lens. I can start to use data as a common language. So when an alert pops up and I want to dive into that data, I can actually use that as a common ground to get my IT team and my security team, who are working more and more together, to understand why they're potentially seeing something different, make a decision, hopefully automate that process if it's well understood, and then move on. And I think that is the key, not moving with siloed kind of data across IT, observability, and security, is starting to bring that together so we can actually build trust.
So let's build on that. Observability is a word we're hearing a lot more. I would argue a few years ago it wasn't spoken about nearly as much. Now we're seeing a plethora of players, and of course Splunk Cloud has made a big pivot. Last year's conf, it was evident that observability is going to be a bigger and bigger part. What's the role that observability is playing in cloud? Why is it gaining so much popularity?
I think with cloud, one of the beauties of cloud, I think maybe back when you and I first entered the IT era, it wasn't quite as complex as now. I had maybe a database server, a middleware, if that, and a HTTP, like a Tomcat or something, serving up my e-commerce store, and that was it. Now we have an amazing amount of different services that we can start to tie together. I have short-lived serverless processes. I may be running things on Kubernetes. My choice is huge, which is liberating, but scary at the same time. And so what we're really seeing, we really get into the kind of what's behind the observability movement. It is the desire to be able to understand and get inside of that. As I get sprawl of the amount of services that run, I want to be able to understand that. And that's where I can use things like logs to look at what happened, metrics as an early warning system, and a trace being able to really get into understanding how things work end to end to get to the real crux of that problem. And I can combine those three things in a way that a user can access it. I have the ability for someone to make a decision there and then. And that is incredibly important. It's all about decision making and turning that kind of data into action.
It's kind of like how, we're taking all of our systems from an infrastructure standpoint with hybrid. Observability is a little bit like that for data. It's taking all these systems, making all the data, and unlocking it for being actionable in a ideally in the fewest possible number of applications, right? I mean, you know, and that's the simplification you mentioned. You know, I when you're saying that, I'm thinking back to myself, the early era of like an AWS when it was literally just storage. Like people don't realize now because they release like 100 new services every quarter, but there was a time when it was literally just service or just storage. That was it, you know. And I mean,
and it changes the way that you can think about things, and actually keeping up with it, I think, is one of the hardest bits that always makes me feel like half my job is just trying to keep up with tech. But if I kind of give an example, so Rappi, they describe themselves as the everything store of Latin America. So they deliver groceries, food, alcohol, you know, almost everything you can think of, with a 30-minute guarantee on delivery times. So if we think about an IT error and the amount of times that someone said, I can fix IT errors within 30 minutes, you would probably start to roll your eyes. It just doesn't happen that often. You know, 30-minute guarantee and an IT error that's going to get fixed in that. We then kind of add in, they've got, I think since 2015, have scaled huge, 30 million users, growing 20% month on month. But they operate across 6,000 hosts in Latin America, 9 countries, 200 cities. And COVID has really massively accelerated that. They've got 400 engineers. They run Kubernetes. They end up with, I think it's something like 6,000 hosts. Oh yeah, I mentioned the hosts, but then they've got those hosts are running 15 to 20,000 containers. Now I think about the customer. I'm wanting to put out that guarantee of being able to deliver your food in 30 minutes. I'm now the person on the front line that I'm empowering at Rappi to make sure that can happen and provide the IT infrastructure to do that. That's what observability is about. It's giving that person the tools to do an amazing job when they turn up to work that day, because they can pinpoint that and they're finding, you know, what was taking 1 day of development and 4 days of code release and testing, they're just shortening that cycle down to, you know, less than a day. And that's the important part. It's about people. And that's why I love the intersection of people and technology. It's allowing people to make a decision so they can have a great day at work and not have to escalate or delay decision making.
Yeah, and it's all about efficiency too. We're in an extraordinarily impatient society now. We want everything on demand. You know, whether it's our content or movies or music or email, you know, you want to buy something, I want it today. You know, it's delivery this week, delivery next day, delivery 2 day, delivery within an hour. You know, you're going to start ordering and stuff's going to start falling out of the ceiling. You're going to have pre-disposal because it's going to know what you want. It's just going to be waiting up there, and then the ceiling's going to open up and the stuff's going to fall out. I mean, you know, it's hyperbole, but you know, we're having a little fun here.
It's not far away. We just, you mentioned that.
The above is a drone, by the way. It's not the ceiling. It's the drone that's going to bring it to you, right?
But you've got young children, so do I. They went throughout this year and they've learned how to do virtual learning. You know, they've got the headphones, the computer in front of them. Apparently, I don't do video calling right because I don't have stickers on my headphones. But if you look at their attitudes to tech and how quickly that they will reject a poor experience. You know, we remember the days of like a web page with a 404, and you go, never mind, and you'll carry on plugging away at it. That's not the case anymore. If that doesn't service, I go to arrive at an airport and one of the hail, you know, taxi ride services doesn't work on my phone, I open the next one. You know, and that's the consumer we are starting to work with. So when we think customer back and how do I provide that experience, that's why this becomes so important.
Absolutely. So let's kind of wrap up with a little lightning round. You know, we're coming to the end of our time here, James. It's been a lot of fun talking to you. Stickers on my headphones. Okay, noted. What do you do with the AirPods if they're really small? Little stickers?
Oh, they're not cool enough. They've got to be over ear. Full over ear.
But then you're a teenager, because I have teenagers too, and they don't do over ear. They only do in ear, really small.
I've not got there yet.
Okay, I'm telling you, because I've got some cool over ears. My older kids won't wear them. All right, so let's do a kind of a quick lightning round about, you know, advice. You know, you're an advisor. That's your title. You lead the global advisory. You know, for companies getting started, what are a couple of key pieces of advice? And then for companies that are maybe a little further along, or some of these cloud native companies, what are a couple pieces of advice for them to move their journey to the next level?
I think that the first one is really be able to articulate the why. What are the business objectives you're trying to do? And then be able to break that down in what is important to you. Is it speed to market? Is it cost control? Because those two things will fight against each other at times. And how do I want to allow people and empower people to make decisions? I think especially for the first group, that allows you to then go and start to make the right tech choices to go and support that decision making. Exactly the same with the lift and shift side. Very clear, very good, clear goals. And then going back to those 6 kind of pitfalls we're thinking about. Start a pre-mortem. I'm going to lift and shift something. Why could this fail? And in a year's time, it fails. Why could that be? And that's where those 6 pitfalls: the runaway cost, the trading innovation for stability, creating a cloud strategy without the security strategy to go with it. You don't have a cohesive approach with your tooling, spreading yourself too thin. You might just not have the capacity to move everything. And then finally is not having a data strategy to support that cloud strategy. Data is the key to decision making, and that allows you to empower your people to make happy customers.
So with the bigger companies, then I imagine you have a few pointers to them. I have to imagine it's more about the agility and just the, I guess, endless state. We like the word stateless in tech. Of digital is that wherever you are today, it's not over.
Correct. And it never will be. Just think of the technology innovation that has happened over the last few years. As we moved into a cloud environment, one of the, especially the larger your organization is how are you going to bring trust between suppliers? You're relying more on APIs nowadays. You're relying more on integration, working with multiple vendors to go and bring out this new service. And it is looking at a common way of sharing trust between just your vendor side, as well as trust with your customers. So we're never going to stop on this journey, and it's a continual reassessment of where you are.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest risk I've seen in a lot of companies is the business model works today. Why should we change it? And that is a little bit like the technology model, especially considering the interdependence of the two. It works today. We don't want to continue to update and change, but you have to. And so, and maybe this leads to my final question here, James. In your role as an advisor, are you noticing that there are conversations about the cloud that leaders maybe should be having, but are not?
Yeah, I think it is acknowledgement that I think it's your point that it's never ending. I think one of the things that we have is a fallacy that all companies will become 100% cloud overnight. They may eventually get there because it may make business sense for them. But I think the hybrid world is really important. And I think the hybrid multi-cloud vendor world is incredibly true. I think even if you went to one of the cloud service providers, you're going to end up with running your own tech inside of that. You're going to be running some of their services as IaaS, as PaaS, as SaaS, and you're still going to need to integrate a holistic data view together to allow you to make decisions. And I think it's the flexibility to be agnostic to what you're running on is the really important part. So I can continue evolving that business. And you mentioned at the beginning about Splunk. We've done the same. We listened to our customers and where they were moving their workloads. And so that's when we started our shift to Splunk Cloud and our portfolios like Observability Cloud we launched. It's going to be continually evolving.
Absolutely. Great way to wrap it up, James. James Hodge, GVP and Chief Strategy Advisor globally for Splunk. Thanks for spending some time with me today here on That's a Data Problem. It's been fun talking about accelerating the cloud and accelerating how quickly cloud can drive your business's transformation.